From the Corner Office is brought to you by Synovus Bank, championing business growth through trusted, relationship-driven banking throughout the Gulf Coast region. Rick Goings didn't grow up thinking he would be president and CEO of one of the most noted storage product brands in the world, Tupperware. But after a stint in the Navy and later owning 2 businesses, Rick took his adventure-seeking mindset to corporate America. He learned that the keys to being a good leader at a small business, humility and authenticity, to name 2, work in big business as well. The Business Observer writes often about celebrated CEOs and leaders like Rick, in print and online. To read more, subscribe. Go to businessobserverfl.com. Hello and welcome to the Business Observer's From the Corner Office podcast. I'm Mark Gordon, managing editor of the Business Observer. Today's guest is Rick Goings, former CEO of Tupperware and the founder of the Rick Goings Institute for Management and Education Leadership. Rick, welcome and thanks for being here.
Good to be here. And Mark, it's good to see you again too after many years.
Yes, you and I were talking just off camera just now about how we met 17 years ago when I wrote a story. 2009, you had come to Manatee County to Bradenton. I think you were based in Orlando at the time, working for Tupperware, and you were doing a lot of work with the Boys and Girls Club of America.
Yes, and that was the great organization in Bradenton. And, I got looped into that Boys and Girls Clubs by the founding family of Avon. He was on the board and he said, Rick, we're changing the name from Boys Clubs to Boys and Girls Clubs. It'll only take you 90 days if you lead that up. It took me 30 years and I was chairman twice.
Yeah, so 90 days, 30 years, nothing is as what it seems, for sure. You were at Avon before Tupperware. We're going to talk about your career in a minute. I definitely
Yes.
want to talk about the Institute for Management and Education Leadership. I
Yes.
feel like there's just not enough of that out there. I want to hear more about that. But
Yeah.
let's get our audience to know you a little bit better, Rick, with some kind of random rapid fire questions. So, what's one leadership habit that you refuse to compromise on?
Well, character would be
Yeah.
It's what I was once at a Boys and Girls Club, and somebody, I think a child, wrote it on the wall, and they heard it from somebody. It said, "Character is what you do when nobody is watching."
Yes. Yeah. So important. Second question: what is the first job you ever had, and what did it teach you about leadership?
Great question. First job I ever had was as a caddie, and it was at a fancy country club outside Chicago. And we, of course, weren't members, but I was a caddie, and my first trait was observation, the power of observation. And I would watch these people, and observation became always a gift to me the rest of my life.
Yeah, so you would watch the other golfers, players, club members, and how they did what they did.
How they talked to one another, and traits that I saw, I would kind of put it in my bandolier, say, I like that. I am attracted to that trait, and try to replicate it in the future.
That's pretty cool. All right. What's one word, Rick, that you would like your team, whether it was Tupperware or the team you have now, to describe you? What's one word you would like your team to use to describe you?
If only one word, Mark, it would have to be dependable.
Yeah, I like it.
Actually, I used to teach in seminars. I used to call it warrior training, and I would take the word responsibility and I would bifurcate it. And it is always to have the ability to respond. And that's what I was Navy. I wasn't a SEAL, but that's what they teach SEALs. And that's the same thing as dependable.
Yeah, showing up, right? How important is just showing up, right?
That's it.
Yeah. All right, we're going to start with the current, Rick. Moving on to some other questions. Tell us what the Rick Goings Institute for Management and education leadership is. What's it all about? How did it get started? And tell us about that.
Yeah, well, uh, I've had an affiliate. I didn't go to Rollins College, but I've been on the board for a number of years, and I'm chairman of the board of Rollins College for my second term now. It is one of the premier. Uh, it's number one in the Southeast right now. Very highly, 10,000 applications for 600 in the freshman class. So it's becoming an
Pretty
elite
elite.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah. And particularly in liberal arts. The
Yeah.
institute, really, the idea was the former president, Grant Cornwell, Anil Menon, who's the dean of our business school. And by the way, Rollins Business School is number one in the state of Florida. Uh, we basically said what needs to be done right now is the job of leader and CEO has changed, but executive education to get them ready has not changed. Mostly B schools right now are teaching people how to become chief financial officers.
Yeah. Yeah. Not the leadership skills that it requires to do all the things that a CEO needs to do.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So before this, you've done some really interesting things in your career. Kind of take us through that, Rick. I know you had some time at Avon, as you mentioned, and that led to Tupperware, where I think you were there for close to 30 years, as I recall from our previous conversation. So what's your tell us your life story, Rick? Tell
Yeah.
us the short version of your life story, the
Yeah.
podcast
Hey,
version.
by the way, a humorous thing is this high school I went to. And by the way, when Susan and I were with the Pope 2 weeks ago for a private audience, we both were happy. We're both Chicago born and raised. And this high school I went to, uh, it produced Bob Woodward. He was 4 years older than me, who Woodward and Bernstein. And by the way, 4 years after me, this is strange. Talk about Alpha and Omega. John Belushi. John was captain of the football team. and and
So you're sandwiched in between Bob Woodward and John Belushi. I love it. That's
yeah,
two
so it's
rando. You could not be more opposite people.
oh God, that's amazing. And by the way, uh, but that's where I was raised. My parents didn't have the money for me to go to school. I joined the Navy. And by the way, that's the first time, Mark, in my life in the Navy, in in boot camp, they made me the leader of my company, and I've never looked back. That's the first leadership role I ever had.
How did you handle that? You know, you're this young guy, you were a caddie, you're in Chicago, and you're like, all right, you lead, Rick, go do it. How did you handle that as a, I guess, a teenager? I mean, how did you approach that?
Well, slowly,
Yeah.
because I would tell you, I was the second shortest kid in my high school graduating class, and now I'm 6 feet. So, you know what? That's when I first learned that real leaders is about collaboration, and but it went well. And from that, I went to the first ship, a warship, and they said, "Hey, this kid's got some potential." So they moved me to the bridge of the ship and trained me to be a navigator. And after that, you know, the Navy paid for me to go to school. So Rollins wouldn't have accepted me back then because I was right in the middle of my graduating class. But things changed, and I went to this Quaker school in North Carolina. I enjoyed it. My senior year, I uh, I started a company. I got news commentator Paul Harvey to be my spokesperson, and I started a company selling actually smoke and fire alarms.
Yes, Paul Harvey. There's more to the story.
Oh, Mark, I used to sit in on his broadcast, and he'd always start by me, me, mo, mo, me, me, mo, mo, me, me. And he'd say, Rick, you ready? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, hello, Americans. And I watched that and he was, this is my long list of mentors, and he was one of them.
He was ahead of his time. Wow, what did you learn from Paul? That's really interesting. What did you learn from him?
Well, it reinforced character
Yeah,
because he was I used to, my dad, died when I was kind of young. I used to send him a Father's Day gift every day, but he was authentic.
yeah,
Authenticity is the word.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So you started a company.
Yeah. And you know what? We were ahead of our time. So I basically, these fire detectors, most people who die in a fire, it's between 10 at night and 6 in the morning. By the time they wake up, they take one breath and it's superheated air. I was proud of that company. And then the government mandated smoke detectors in certain homes. And so they were selling, Sears started selling them and giving a 50% rebate. So I had to pivot it quickly and started another company. By the way, I sold that and I started a company. Gosh, if I'd had the internet, it was called Fortunate Pet because I love dogs and cats and pets and horses. And uh, I threw all kinds of money in that. We were ahead of our time because I saw Chewy right now is a $16 billion company, but
Yeah,
I didn't have the internet.
yeah, there's some crazy valuations of some of these pet companies, and alright, so
Oh,
you have yeah, you're doing this, and then at some point, you got into corporate America. Tell us about that.
well, let me tell you why. I used
Yeah,
to have a sophisticated explanation that wasn't, yeah, it was true, but distorted. Why did you go to Avon? Well, the truth be known, I went to Avon because, quote unquote, I needed a job. I needed the income. And they recruited me because they had seen since 24, I had been running my own companies. And they said, we need some of that kind of, outside influence here. And it was the best business decision I ever made.
really. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the sort of lessons or things that happened at Avon that made you, the leader that you then became? What are some of the things that happened there, sort of defined your tenure?
Well, I go all of a sudden to New York and I'm in my 30s. I'd run these two other companies. And what I found out, I thought I was going to be, oh gosh, everybody there was going to be so much smarter, etc. I've never felt I was the smartest one in the room, but what I saw, every one of them there were just like me, but I had 15 years experience as a managing director. So they were so functionally focused on finance, human resources, marketing. I had all of that. Uh, and so within a year after putting me in strategy, they sent me to say, okay, we think you can run a whole country. So they sent me to Germany. And even though my family's heritage was Austrian, I said, guys, I don't speak German. So I had to learn to do a turnaround business. There were about $150 million at that time, and learn the language. And I've got to say, Mark, it's the best job I ever had.
Really?
I loved it.
Really? What
Yeah.
well, I guess 2 questions. 1, what did you love so much about it? And 2, sort of related, like, did you just sit there as like, "Man, 15 years ago, I was in the Marines, didn't know what the heck I was doing, and now, I'm running this company in Germany." How did you, sort of factor all that in together? I'm sorry, the Navy. How did you factor that in together?
Well, it just because my attitude is every day I'm growing, and it was all experience. And I've got to say, if I'm giving one bit of advice to somebody about their life, I said, write the word down adventure. It's got to be an adventure. And most people, and people a lot, you know, more philosophical even than me, have said people don't so much look back at their life and say, I'm sorry for what I did. Most are sorry for the things they didn't do. Adventure. It was adventure. All of a sudden, I'm sitting there in Germany running this company and running Austria. And what I learned at Avon too is it sure is easier when you've got a room full of really bright people and all they need and want is strategic direction and inspiration. And I could do those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did that
So they
translate?
pushed me ahead.
Yeah. Well, totally did. And then Tupperware, how did that, that was a $1 billion entity. How did that, your experience there translate to Tupperware and what we were able to accomplish there?
Well, they saw what happened to me at Avon, that I went up, became an officer at Avon, and then I went to Hong Kong and I ran all Asia Pacific, and then I ran their biggest units at Avon, and they said, "Whoa, this." The company that owned Tupperware at that time, Premium Trademarks, they said, "We don't know how to do this business down there." Uh, and it was exciting because I was raised with that brand. And when I first got there, all they needed was some direction, strategic direction. And I started to leverage all the experience that Avon gave me. Avon was like my graduate business school. And so I just plugged it in. I took Tupperware across the world. And our sales force used to say, I used to love it. They would say, in the US, you put your garbage in Rubbermaid, but your food in Tupperware. I said, we can build off that.
Yes. We can work with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So looking back at your whole career, Rick, what's a piece of feedback that was hard for you to hear at the time that you look back on now that made you the leader you are today?
I've got to say it. And when I think about that, I would think one of the gifts I've had is I have been open to all of the feedback. So I've never resisted in it, and I always have viewed myself as I would draw the head and circle of an individual, and we are today the person we are, and the goal and the objective of life is to become the person we could become.
Yeah.
And you better be open to feedback on that. The biggest thing I learned though at Avon was the power. I became a zealot there about women's empowerment. And that's why, even from my 20 years World Economic Forum, where I ended up leading the whole charge for gender parity, the power of women, and there weren't enough guys that were behind really supporting gender parity. And that has been one of my greatest, you know, gifts. And I've been open to it, and I was just aware.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. You mentioned, and on that segue, you mentioned mentors, Paul Harvey, some others. What's the one or two pieces of advice you learned from your mentors that really changed your leadership style or leadership approach?
yeah. Probably the two biggest things I really learned is humility and empathy. And each one of these things, they don't teach those in graduate business school. And that's when, it's a great concept, Mark. All any organization is, as its core, is a collection of people. Uh, and if you learn that side of it, anyone can learn the hard stuff on, finance, strategy, etc. But the connection of people and bringing people together and inspiring them, that's why empathy is very, very important, and humility, because when you're humble, that enables collaboration.
Yeah.
You haven't got to be the smartest one in the room.
Yeah. Is there an example? I'm sure there is, but what would be an example, at Tupperware, another leadership entity you're at, where you had to use humility and say, "Hey, I wasn't right about this. Let's rethink this." Or, what's an example to you that you learned a lot from while being a leader with humility?
Well, I must say, I sought inputs from my senior management team all along the way. And at one time, I would use an example. Target stores wanted to have our products in there. And I said, no, we only sell through our sales force. I said, I'll tell you what, if you'll allow the Tupperware manager and wherever the area is where there's a Target, she can go in there and she can sell Tupperware and she can recruit and date, you know, schedule parties from there. Okay, we'll do that. We found out within 6 months that in those areas, people thought we had gone retail. We had
Right.
not gone, we were still supporting our sales force
Right.
uh, by that, but it was a mistake. And I remember calling the head of Target and saying, by the way, we're pulling our product out of
Really?
there. And they said, nobody ever does that. I
Yeah.
said, we just did it.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I mean, humility is the perfect word. The ability to and the willingness to say, "Hey, this isn't going to work for us. We're gonna stop it." Is
Yes.
at that level of corporate America is certainly unusual.
Yeah.
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 Excellent. All right, before we get to the end, I wanted to go back, Boys and Girls Club, and also the World Youth Clubs. You've put a lot of your time, Rick, into these, nonprofit ventures. What are these about? What is the World Youth Clubs about, and why has this been an important mission for you for most of your life?
Well, it's been such an important mission, Mark, because, you know, whoever's going to be running the world in the future, we're the youth of today and the investment there. And what I learned that 30 years with Boys and Girls Clubs, I could take a place. I used to use Central Florida and the five counties around there. If a kid went to a club, graduation rates were higher. Secondly, they never got arrested. You know, uh, yeah. Thirdly, teenagers weren't having babies. At it, and we're basically saying uh, they were different. Their lives were different when we did that with the breakdown of family. So the reason we started World Youth Clubs was that U.S. is only 5% of the world's population, and but as I say critically, we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison
Yeah.
population. We got a lot of work we got to do. And so for me, living and working outside the US, I felt the kinship to so many and that out there, and we've got to bring the club. So initially, our dear friend Bo Bridges, who's been a friend of my wife Susan for so many, his wife Wendy, he was doing a Free Willy movie in South Africa. And even when I was with Tupperware, so we opened a Boys and Girls Club there and we helped fund it. Then we opened one in Mexico. And that led to once I had left Tupperware, we made a decision we need to open clubs outside the US. And by their charter, Boys and Girls Clubs were not allowed to do it. But with their partnership, they're very close with us and us, them. And uh, now we've got 70 countries. And the thing I'm most proud of, it's taken off really these last couple of years that my wife, Susan, who was a broadcast journalist with ABC, uh, with her as chairman. And
Yeah.
so now we're doing the same thing. We're trying to give them safe places for kids, put them into a club where there's the right kind of people who are there helping them, uh, give them, Mark, role models.
Yeah,
And thirdly, we teach them the programs. When I first started with it, the biggest issue was academic success. Biggest issue with regard to young youth around the world right now is mental health
for
issues
sure.
and
Yeah.
depression.
Mental
Yeah,
health, the loneliness epidemic,
yeah,
all big topics. All right,
yeah.
Rick, last question. You sort of touched on in the beginning, but what do you want your legacy to be? What would you want people to say about you as a leader and the kind of leader you have been? What would you want your leadership legacy to be?
Oh, actually, I'm looking at a thing that's on the bottom of my computer. It says add value. And that's on a, I do two things every morning when I wake up. Firstly, I write a little 3x5 card to my wife, and every day, because, romance should be a daily effort. The second thing is I want to add value, and I think I've helped influence all of those people who were one of mine. I've never had a senior person ever quit and go somewhere else. And they're now running different companies all over the world. And I would hope that they got the stickiness from me, that they understood add value. And that's what we used to kid that if I would walk into a public restroom and there were towels on the floor, I would pick them up, push them in the trash can, and wash my hands. I said, Mother Teresa taught people it's not always the big things you do, but the big things you do start with little things that you do every day, and you magnify those things.
Yeah, love it. What a great way to end it. Add value. Fantastic. Rick Goings of the Rick Goings Institute for Management, Education, Leadership. Thank you so much, Rick, for joining us on the From the Corner Office podcast.
A pleasure being with you, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Business Observer From the Corner Office podcast. I'm your host, Mark Gordon. This podcast was produced by Reed Corley of the Corley Company in Sarasota. To hear more episodes of From the Corner Office podcast, go to businessobserverfl.com.